My name is Cora Matthews, and I am 42 years old. The last 6 weeks have been a waking nightmare. A slow-motion fall into a chasm of grief and terror that began the night my 16-year-old daughter, Eliza, didn't come home. The frantic calls, the sleepless nights, the hollow-eyed visits from detectives, it all blurred into one continuous loop of dread. Then, tonight, the call finally came. They'd found her. A patrol car had picked her up 2 states away, unharmed. The relief was so absolute, so tidal, that my knees buckled and I sobbed into the phone, thanking a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. But the relief was a mirage. When the police brought her to my front door an hour later, the daughter who stepped out of the car was a stranger. She looked at me not with recognition, not with anger or relief, but with a chilling, vacant stare. And as the detective stood between us, she pointed a finger at me and said the words that shattered my universe. "I've never seen this woman before in my life." If you're a parent or have ever loved someone so much you'd do anything for them, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Before I tell you how I fought to reclaim my daughter from a lie that was more terrifying than any kidnapper, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Before my world fractured, it was a place of quiet, cherished order. I was a widow and a mother. My husband, Reese, had been stolen from us by a sudden heart attack 3 years ago, leaving a void that Eliza and I had learned to navigate together. We weren't just mother and daughter. We were a team. I worked as a senior archivist at the city's historical museum, a job that suited my meticulous nature. My life was about preserving the past, about piecing together fragmented histories to tell a true story. I never imagined I would have to apply those skills to my own life. Our home was a small, century-old bungalow filled with Reese's books, Eliza's art projects, and the scent of the lemon verbena I grew in the garden. It was a house built on love and memory. Eliza, my sweet, fiercely intelligent Ellie, was the center of it all. She had her father's inquisitive mind and my artistic hands. Since Reese's death, she had become quieter, more introspective, but I chalked it up to the layered grief of being a teenager who had lost her hero. The last few months, before she disappeared, things had been different. She'd become more secretive, spending hours locked in her room, her laptop a constant companion. When I asked what she was doing, she'd mutter, "Schoolwork," and angle the screen away. The easy laughter we once shared had been replaced by a tense, fragile silence. I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion, a phase she would outgrow. I tried to give her space, terrified that clinging too tightly would only push her further away. I now know that the space I gave her was a vacuum, and something monstrous had rushed in to fill it. The night she disappeared, we had a small, stupid argument over her curfew. She'd stormed out, shouting that I didn't understand her, that I was trying to control her. It was a typical teenage drama until it wasn't. When she wasn't home by midnight, I started to worry. By 2 a.m., I was frantic. By dawn, I had called the police. The 6 weeks that followed were the definition of hell. I plastered her face on every telephone pole. I sat through agonizing interviews. I gave DNA samples and access to her computer. The detectives were kind but grim. Runaways, they explained, were notoriously difficult to find if they didn't want to be found. And now here she was, standing on my porch, bathed in the flashing blue and red lights of the patrol car, looking at me as if I were a complete stranger. She was thinner, her hair cut shorter in a choppy, unfamiliar style, but it was her, my Ellie.
"Eliza, honey, it's me. It's Mom," I said, my voice breaking as I took a step toward her. She flinched, physically recoiling behind the detective. "Please don't let her touch me. she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know who she is. The detective, a man named Miles Corbin, with tired, empathetic eyes, placed a steadying hand on my arm. Ma'am, why don't we all go inside and talk about this? He guided us into the living room, the same room where Eliza had taken her first steps, the same room where we'd huddled together on the night Reese died. She sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, as far from me as possible, her eyes darting around the room as if it were an alien landscape. My name is not Eliza, she said, her voice clear and firm now. My name is Isla, and that woman is not my mother. Detective Corbin sat on the armchair between us, a reluctant mediator in a reality-bending crisis. He held a small notepad, but he wasn't writing, just watching us, his expression a careful mixture of professional skepticism and human concern. Okay, Isla, he said, using the name she'd given him. Can you tell me who your parents are? My parents are Veronica and Desmond Abbott, she replied, without hesitation. They live in Crestwood. I don't know how I got here. The last thing I remember is being at the library, and then everything is a blur. Then the police found me. Crestwood was an affluent, gated community on the other side of the state, a world away from our modest neighborhood. I had never heard the name Abbott in my life. Ma'am, her legal name is Eliza Matthews, Detective Corbin stated, looking at me. Her birth certificate, school records, medical files, they all confirm it. We found her social security card in her wallet. Those are lies, Eliza, or Isla, interjected, her voice rising with a strange, rehearsed indignation. She must have fabricated them. My real parents have been looking for me for years. The detective turned back to me, his gaze softening slightly. Has she had any recent trauma? A head injury? Any history of psychological issues? Dissociative episodes? No, nothing, I said, my mind racing. She's been struggling since her father died, but never like this. This is impossible. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, my hand shaking as I picked up a framed photo. It was from last summer, a picture of Eliza and me at the beach, her arms wrapped around my neck, both of us laughing into the camera. Ellie, look, this is us. This is you. Don't you remember? I held the photo out to her. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable, then looked away. I don't know who that girl is, but it's not me. Her denial was so absolute, so unwavering. It was terrifying. It wasn't the defiance of a runaway teenager. It was the conviction of someone speaking their absolute truth. My daughter was looking at me, but the person inside was gone. The next few hours were a bureaucratic nightmare. Because Eliza was a minor, claiming to be in danger from a stranger, me, protocol had to be followed. A social worker was called. A child psychologist was dispatched from the on-call crisis team. My home, my sanctuary, was filled with strangers speaking in low, serious tones, assessing me, assessing my daughter. I felt like a suspect in my own life. The psychologist, a calm, gentle woman named Dr. Zola Adebayo, spoke with Eliza alone in the dining room for over an hour. When she emerged, her face was grave. Cora, I'd like to speak with you. She led me into the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the police officers. What's happening to her? Is it amnesia? I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. It's complex, Dr. Adebayo said carefully.
She presents with no signs of a typical dissociative fugue state. Her memory of her life as Isla Abbott is detailed and internally consistent. She can describe her home, her parents, her favorite pets, her favorite foods. She believes this reality 100%. However, she has no recollection of anything related to Eliza Matthews. It's as if that entire identity has been erased and replaced. So she's lying? It doesn't present as conscious deception. It presents as a deeply held, unshakable belief. This could be a case of a profound psychological break, or something else. Something else? What could possibly be something else? Before she could answer, Detective Corbin entered the kitchen, his phone in his hand. His expression was troubled. "Mrs. Matthews, I just got off the phone with the Crestwood Police Department. A couple named Veronica and Desmond Abbott filed a missing persons report for their daughter Isla 12 years ago. They were contacted tonight about your daughter's case. They're on their way here. They think Eliza might be their long-lost child." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. This wasn't a delusion. These people were real. They were coming to my house to claim my daughter? The 2 hours it took for the Abbotts to arrive were the longest of my life. I sat in my living room, a prisoner in my own home, while my daughter, the girl I had nursed through fevers, taught to ride a bike, and held as she wept over her father's death, sat across from me, guarded by a social worker, her face a mask of polite indifference. I tried to catch her eye, to send a silent message of love, of memory, but she refused to look at me. When the doorbell rang, my heart hammered against my ribs. Detective Corbin opened the door to reveal a couple who looked like they had stepped out of a luxury magazine. Desmond Abbott was tall and silver-haired, dressed in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks. Veronica Abbott was impossibly elegant, with a perfectly composed face that betrayed no emotion except a kind of pained grace. They were the picture of refined, old money grief. They walked into my living room, and Veronica's eyes immediately found Eliza. A soft gasp escaped her lips. "Isla?" she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Eliza stood up, and for the first time since she'd arrived, a flicker of emotion crossed her face, a hesitant, hopeful smile. "Mom?" The word was a dagger in my heart. Veronica rushed forward and enveloped Eliza in a hug, burying her face in my daughter's hair. "Oh, my baby, we've missed you so much. We never gave up hope." Desmond stood behind them, his hand on Veronica's shoulder, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a perfect cinematic reunion. And I was the villain who had been keeping them apart. They had brought evidence, a whole box of it. They spread photos across my coffee table, pictures of a baby girl with Eliza's wide, dark eyes and distinctive birthmark, a tiny crescent moon just behind her left ear. They had a birth certificate for Isla Abbott. They had home videos of a toddler who looked uncannily like my Ellie, toddling around a lavishly decorated nursery. They told a heartbreaking story of how their daughter had been abducted from a park at age 4, a case that went cold for 12 long years. "We have searched for her every single day," Desmond said, his voice thick with emotion. "We hired private investigators. We worked with national missing children's organizations. We never stopped looking." Detective Corbin looked from their evidence to me, his face unreadable. "Mrs. Matthews, they have a compelling case. And your daughter, she recognizes them." "She's not their daughter," I insisted, my voice rising in panic. "I have a birth certificate too. I have photos. I have 16 years of memories. We believe you were a victim as well, Mrs. Matthews," Veronica said, her voice dripping with pity as she turned to me.
"Whoever took our Isla must have sold her to you. Perhaps you adopted her through a private agency, never knowing her true origins. We don't blame you. We just want our daughter back." The narrative was genius. It painted them as grieving victims and me as an unwitting but ultimately illegitimate caretaker. It explained away all my evidence, all my history. I was just the foster mother who didn't know any better. The situation was now a full-blown jurisdictional crisis. Eliza, or Isla, could not stay with me while she was actively claiming I was a stranger. But she couldn't be handed over to the Abbotts without a thorough investigation. Dr. Adebayo made the recommendation. For her own well-being, she needs to be in a neutral, safe environment until we can sort this out. I recommend a temporary placement at the Oakwood Youth Center. The thought of my daughter in a state-run facility, a place for troubled kids and foster children, made me physically ill. But what choice did I have? They wouldn't let her stay with me. The Abbotts, after a show of reluctant agreement, concurred. "Whatever is best for Isla's mental health," Veronica said nobly. As they led Eliza out of the house, she looked back, not at me, but at the Abbotts. "Don't leave me," she pleaded with them. "We won't, my darling," Veronica promised. "We'll see you tomorrow. We're going to bring you home soon." I stood on my porch, watching the cars pull away, leaving me in a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than any I had ever known. They hadn't just taken my daughter's body. They'd stolen her mind, her history, her very soul, and I had no idea how to get her back. The days that followed were a disorienting hell. My life became a series of sterile meeting rooms, police stations, lawyers' offices, psychologist clinics. The burden of proof was suddenly on me. I had to prove I was Eliza's mother, a fact as fundamental to my existence as breathing. I brought in boxes of evidence, photo albums tracking every year of her life, her first lost tooth, a lock of hair from her first haircut, school report cards, art projects, letters she'd written me from summer camp. The Abbotts, meanwhile, were masters of optics. They hired a high-profile family lawyer and a public relations firm. Their story was leaked to the media, a tragic tale of a wealthy family reunited with their long-lost, kidnapped daughter. They were sympathetic figures. I, by contrast, was cast as a hysterical, possibly unstable woman, clinging to a child that wasn't hers. The narrative that Veronica had so skillfully planted, that I was an unwitting victim of an illegal adoption, was my only saving grace. The only thing that kept me from being painted as a kidnapper myself. Detective Corbin was my only tether to an objective reality. He was methodical, poring over both sets of evidence with equal scrutiny. "The problem, Cora," he told me during one of our meetings, "is that both your stories are plausible. You have a lifetime of evidence that she is your daughter. They have compelling evidence that their daughter was abducted, and she bears a striking resemblance to Eliza, right down to the birthmark. And the most powerful piece of evidence they have is Eliza herself. She's unwavering." The key, he explained, was a DNA test. It was the only thing that could definitively prove her parentage. The Abbotts had readily agreed, confident in the outcome. I agreed as well, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. The science would not lie. The test would bring my Ellie back to me. While we waited for the legal hurdles of the court-ordered DNA test to be cleared, I began my own investigation. I was an archivist. My job was to find the truth in faded documents and forgotten records. I would apply my professional skills to the most important project of my life. I started with Eliza's laptop. The police had already done a forensic analysis and found nothing. Her search history was clean, her social media accounts dormant for months. But I knew my daughter. I knew her passwords, her habits.
I found it in a hidden folder, disguised as a school project.
It was a second secret social media profile under the name of Isla. The account was private, but I managed to guess the password. Her father's birthday, a sequence of numbers she had always used for things she wanted to keep secret. What I found made my blood run cold. For nearly a year, Eliza had been in contact with a woman she knew only as V. This woman had reached out to her claiming to be a genealogist working on a secret project. She had told Eliza a fantastical story about a hospital mix-up, about a baby girl switched at birth. She had slowly, methodically fed my grieving, vulnerable daughter a new identity. V, who I knew had to be Veronica Abbott, had groomed her. She had sent the doctored baby photos. She had coached her on the details of Isla's life. She had preyed on Eliza's grief for her father, telling her that her feelings of sadness and disconnection were because she was subconsciously remembering her real family. She had offered her a new life, a perfect, wealthy family to replace the broken one she felt she was in. Eliza, lost in her own teenage sorrow, had latched onto it as a lifeline. It wasn't a delusion, it was a carefully constructed brainwashing campaign. I took my findings to Detective Corbin. He looked at the chat logs, his expression grim. This is psychological kidnapping. It's methodical. It's predatory. It's proof, isn't it? I asked, my voice filled with a desperate hope. It's strong evidence of manipulation, he said, but it doesn't change the core question. They will claim they only did this because they genuinely believe she was their daughter. We still need the DNA test to be certain. My hope deflated. Everything still hinged on that one terrifying test. My friend Freya was my rock. She listened to my frantic theories. She brought me food I didn't eat, and she reminded me to breathe. What if they're right, Freya? I whispered one night, the terrible doubt creeping in. What if there was a mix-up? What if she's not mine? Don't you dare, Freya said, her voice fierce. You are her mother. I've seen you with her for 16 years. That is not something that can be faked or replaced. Trust your gut, Cora. Trust your history. The day of the DNA test arrived. We all met at a neutral, court-approved lab. I saw Eliza for the first time in 2 weeks. She was with the Abbotts, dressed in new, expensive clothes that looked alien on her. She wouldn't look at me. As a lab technician took a simple cheek swab from each of us, I tried to catch her eye, to send her a message of love. She just stared straight ahead, a perfectly composed stranger. The results would take 48 hours. 2 more days of hell. The 48-hour wait was a unique form of torture. I couldn't work, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I paced the floors of my silent house, every photograph, every piece of Eliza's artwork on the fridge, mocking me with a past that felt like it was being erased. I reread the chat logs between Eliza and V 100 times. The calculated cruelty of Veronica's manipulation made me sick to my stomach. She had targeted my daughter's deepest insecurities, her grief, her teenage angst, and twisted them into a weapon against our family. I started digging into the Abbotts. If they were capable of this level of deception, what else were they hiding? I used my archival research skills, scouring public records, old news articles, and financial databases. They were indeed a wealthy, prominent family from Crestwood, but as I dug deeper, I found cracks in their perfect facade. Desmond Abbott's investment firm had suffered massive losses in the last fiscal year. They had recently sold their summer home. Public records showed 2 liens on their main property. They weren't just grieving parents, they were financially desperate.
What could they possibly gain from claiming Eliza? It didn't make sense until I found it. A small, buried article from 12 years ago about the abduction of Isla Abbott. The article mentioned that a significant trust fund established by Isla's maternal grandfather was set up to be released on her 18th birthday. If she was never found, the money, millions of dollars, would be absorbed into a larger family trust controlled by a different branch of the family. But if she was found, the money, millions of dollars, would be hers, or more accurately, her parents to control. This wasn't just about a lost daughter. This was a multi-million-dollar fraud. I immediately called Detective Corbin. "This is the motive," I told him, my voice shaking with the thrill of discovery. "They're broke. They need the trust fund." "It adds a powerful motive, I'll grant you that," he said, his voice cautious. "But we need to be careful, Cora. This is still circumstantial. Everything still depends on the DNA. The results are due back tomorrow morning. I'll call you the second I have them." That night, sleep was an impossibility. I sat in Eliza's room holding her favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out teddy bear named Barnaby that she'd had since she was a baby. I thought about the DNA, about the science that would either save me or condemn me. What if, by some impossible twist of fate, the test came back in their favor? The doubt was a poison seeping into the cracks of my exhaustion. The call from Detective Corbin came at 9:15 a.m. I answered on the first ring, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. "Cora," he said, and the tone of his voice, it wasn't triumphant. It was heavy, filled with a pity that terrified me. "I have the results." "And?" I whispered, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. There was a long, agonizing pause. "Cora, I'm so sorry. The test came back. You are not her biological mother. Veronica Abbott is." The world went silent. The floor, the walls, the very air around me seemed to dissolve. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The detective's voice continued, a distinct, meaningless buzz. He was saying something about hospital mix-ups, about the possibility of a legal battle for custody based on 16 years of care, but his words didn't register. The only words that mattered were, "You are not her mother." My entire life, my most fundamental identity had been a lie. The daughter I had raised, loved, and fought for was not mine. I don't remember hanging up the phone. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor of my kitchen, the phone lying beside me, a great, silent scream trapped in my lungs. My Ellie, my baby, she was gone, and I had no right to get her back. The hours after that phone call were a black hole. Freya found me on the kitchen floor and held me as my world imploded. The grief was a physical thing, an unbearable weight crushing the air from my lungs. Every memory I had of Eliza was now tainted, recast as a moment with someone else's child. The DNA test was irrefutable, a scientific death blow to my motherhood. The Abbott's lawyer called my lawyer. They were magnanimous in their victory, offering a generous settlement for my 16 years of childcare services in exchange for me signing away any and all future claims. They were moving forward with the legal process to have Isla, terminally Eliza, return to their permanent custody. I was supposed to break. I was supposed to accept the settlement, retreat into my grief, and disappear from their lives. That's what they were counting on. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of Eliza's empty room, something shifted. It started as a tiny, insistent whisper of doubt. How? How could a hospital mix-up happen in this day and age with all the protocols and bracelets and checks? And how, by some cosmic coincidence, did the switch child end up being targeted by her supposed biological mother, a woman who had a multi-million-dollar motive to find her? The odds were astronomical.
I got out of bed and went to my computer. I was no longer a mother fighting for her child. I was an archivist fighting for the truth. I ignored the pain, the grief, and focused on the data. I pulled up the chat logs again, the financial records, the old news articles. I wasn't looking for evidence of motherhood anymore. I was looking for the flaw in their story. I found it in a photograph, one of the baby pictures the Abbotts had provided, a picture of Isla at her first birthday party. In the background, sitting on a mantelpiece, was a digital clock. It was blurry, but I zoomed in using my design software to enhance the image. The date on the clock was clearly visible. It was a full 3 months after the date on Isla Abbott's official birth certificate. The photo had been taken before their daughter was supposedly even born. It was a small thing, a tiny discrepancy, but it was a crack, and I was going to break it wide open. I started cross-referencing everything. The Abbotts had provided a list of friends who could attest to their life with Isla before her abduction. I started running background checks on them. One of them, a woman listed as Isla's godmother, had filed for bankruptcy 5 years ago. Her lawyer in that case? The same lawyer who was now representing the Abbotts. It was a closed loop. The final piece of the puzzle came from Reese. My kind, brilliant, departed husband had been a tech enthusiast. Our entire home, all our photos, all our documents, were backed up to a private, encrypted server he had built himself. I had forgotten about it. It took me hours to remember the password sequence. When I finally logged in, I found everything. Every photo I'd ever taken, every video, every document, all with immutable encrypted metadata. I found the photo, the one I had taken in the hospital 3 hours after Eliza was born. I was holding her, exhausted but radiant. Reese had taken the picture, and in the background, visible on the hospital tray table, was a newspaper. I zoomed in. The headline was clear. The date was clear. And most importantly, I zoomed in on my daughter's tiny, wrinkled ear. The crescent moon birthmark was there, faint but unmistakable. The Abbott story was that their daughter had been abducted at age 4. But here was my daughter as a newborn with the same unique birthmark they had used as their primary identifier. Their entire case was built on a lie. They hadn't found their lost daughter. They had found a random teenager who looked like their dead one, and they had built a fortress of lies around her. But what about the DNA? It was the one thing I couldn't explain. I called Detective Corbin, my voice trembling with a new kind of energy. I can prove it. I can prove she is mine. But something is wrong with the DNA test. I sent him everything. The enhanced photo with the clock, the financial links, and the newborn photo from my private server. He was silent for a long time after I finished explaining. "Stay put," he said, finally, his voice tight with an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way. And I'm bringing a warrant for the lab that processed that DNA sample." The truth, when it finally unraveled, was uglier and more audacious than I could have imagined. Detective Corbin's team descended on the DNA lab. The technician who had processed our samples had quit his job and vanished the day after the results were released. But his bank records told the story. A $50,000 deposit wired from an offshore account linked to a shell corporation owned by Desmond Abbott. He had been paid to switch the samples. He had used Veronica's DNA and declared it a match for Eliza. The entire irrefutable scientific proof was a fraud.
The Abbott's real daughter, Isla, had not been abducted. She had died in a tragic drowning accident in their backyard pool when she was 3. They had covered it up, telling friends and family she had been taken from a park to avoid the shame and potential negligence charges. They had lived with that lie for 12 years. When their financial world began to collapse, Desmond concocted an insane, desperate plan. He found Eliza through an online database of missing children's photos from years ago, noticing her uncanny resemblance to their deceased daughter. The rest was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and fraud. The confrontation took place at the Oakwood Youth Center. I arrived with Detective Corbin and Dr. Adebayo. The Abbotts were already there for their scheduled visit with Eliza, bearing expensive gifts. When they saw us, their faces fell.
Veronica and Desmond Abbott, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and psychological endangerment of a minor, Detective Corbin said, his voice ringing with authority. Veronica started to scream, a raw animal sound of a cornered predator. Desmond just seemed to deflate, all the arrogant confidence draining out of him. But the real challenge was still ahead. I walked into the small visiting room where Eliza was waiting. She looked up, her face a mask of confusion. "They're lying," she said, looking at me. "My parents, they wouldn't do that." "Ellie," I said, my voice soft, "it's time to come home." Dr. Adebayo spent the next hour with her, gently, carefully, deconstructing the lies she had been fed. She showed her the evidence, the chat logs, the proof of the doctored DNA test, the news articles about the real Isla's death. I waited outside, my heart aching with every passing minute. When the door finally opened, Eliza stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with a universe of pain and confusion. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Mom," she whispered, the word fragile, uncertain. Tears streamed down my face as I wrapped my arms around her. She was stiff at first, then she sagged against me, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry," she cried into my shoulder. "I don't understand. I thought—" "Shh, it's okay," I whispered, holding her tight. "I've got you. It's over. We'll figure it all out together." The journey back was not a simple one. The trauma of the manipulation had left deep scars on Eliza. She had to grieve the loss of her father all over again, and also grieve the loss of the perfect imaginary family she thought she had found. We started intensive therapy together with Dr. Adebayo. There were days of angry silence, days of tearful confusion, and days where I felt the old, easy connection between us flicker back to life. I learned to be patient, to give her the space to heal at her own pace. I never once blamed her for being deceived. She was a vulnerable teenager, and they were sophisticated predators. We rebuilt our life one small, true thing at a time. We cooked her favorite meal together. We watched the old home movies from when she was little. We visited Rice's grave and told him we were okay. The Abbotts were convicted, their story making national headlines as a bizarre tale of greed and grief. The trust fund they had been after was eventually redirected by the courts to a charity for victims of psychological abuse. Justice was served, but I took no joy in their downfall. They were just two more broken people who had tried to fix their own pain by breaking someone else. About a year after she came home, Eliza and I were sitting in the garden, a comfortable silence between us. She had started painting again, her canvases filled with abstract swirls of color that were both chaotic and beautiful.
"I think I finally understand," she said quietly, not looking at me. "They didn't love me. They loved the idea of me. They loved what I could do for them." "And what about me?" I asked, my heart holding its breath. She turned to look at me then, and her eyes were clear, the confusion finally gone. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You just loved me," she said. "That's the difference." And it was. In the end, the truth was not found in a DNA test or a birth certificate. It was found in the quiet, steady, unbreakable love between a mother and her daughter. A love that had been tested, torn apart, but had ultimately refused to be erased. Have you ever had a moment that made you question your entire reality? What does the word family truly mean to you? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about the enduring power of truth and love. Remember that the strongest bonds are often not the ones we are born with, but the ones we fight to keep. Thank you for listening.